Later this week, we're going to consider an issue which is complicated, but it's an issue that affects every single American that ever takes a piece of plastic and pays for anything, at a hotel, at a restaurant, at a convenience store, tuition at a school, a charitable deduction to Red Cross in the midst of a disaster. If you use plastic, every time that debit card, and we're talking just about debit cards for this conversation, every time that debit card is swiped, there's a fee that goes to the bank that issued the card. And you think to yourself, well, I wonder how they negotiate those fees. And the answer is they don't. What happens is the credit card companies, the two giants, Visa and MasterCard, working through the issuing banks, determine what's going to be charged every time you swipe the card. So, what does a local grocery store have to say about it? Nothing. Their alternative is to not accept plastic at all. Visa and MasterCard say, you want to use our cards, you play by our rules, and our rules will tell you how much we take every time you swipe the card. I've seen it happen, you have too, where you go into a store and you shake your head because that young person in front of you just bought a candy bar and is using a piece of plastic to pay for it. And you think to yourself, why don't they reach in their pocket and pull out a dollar bill and pay for it? Instead, they swipe the card. And you know what happens? That person selling that candy bar just lost money, because the folks at the bank and the credit card companies are going to get that swipe fee, which happens to be more than the profit that that little grocery store is going to make on a candy bar. So naturally, retailers and merchants all across America have said, this isn't fair to us. We have no negotiating power when it comes to how much is taken out each time there's a plastic transaction for debit cards, and the consumers don't know. We know as retailers, but the consumers don't even know. There is no transparency, there is no competition. Well, what's wrong with this picture? If you believe in a free market, you believe in those two things, you ought to believe there'd be some competition, so maybe there'd be one debit card company that charges a lower fee. Maybe there would be special consideration given if somebody paid in cash. I guess this dates me, but there was a time when people paid in cash for almost everything, except when they used a check, and that was rare. And when they processed the check, it was pennies. Right now, what the Federal Reserve tells us is that for each and every debit card transaction, the average fee charged is 44 cents. When we passed an amendment here last year, we said to the Federal Reserve, well, what's the actual cost to the company, the issuing bank and the credit card, debit card company, for processing this transaction? They said 10 or 12 cents, and they're charging over 40 cents on each transaction. Who pays it? We all pay it. Even if you walk into a store to pay cash, that merchant has put a price on that good that considers the fact that most people are using plastic, so they have to raise that price to cover that fee. So we said to the Federal Reserve, sit down and figure out what's reasonable and proportional in terms of the cost that should be collected every time you swipe the fee. Well, this is a big political issue, one of the biggest. You might say it's a multi-billion-dollar issue, and it is, because each month in America, over $1.3 billion, $1.3 billion is collected from customers all across America when they swipe their debit cards. And where does the money go? Most of it goes to the biggest banks on Wall Street. The same banks that were just moaning and groaning a few years ago about they needed a bailout because they made some big mistakes, they're back again. They want a bailout when it comes to these debit cards. They want to be able to continue to collect 40 cents and more on every transaction. Well, we passed a law that said the party's over. Starting July 21st, there'll be a new rule that'll establish a reasonable fee. And they have been fighting this with all of their might. All of their lobbyists, all of their workers, all the letters they can send against this reform. Why? Because it involves money, huge amounts of money for these major Wall Street banks and credit card companies. Well, we've got to bring an end to this. The consumer groups across America, labor groups, even some small business groups, retail federation, merchants, saloon keepers, hotel owners, restaurant owners, convenience store owners all across America have said we've got to quit this. This isn't fair to us and to our customers. Let us have a reasonable amount charged for what's actually taking place with the debit card, and we can live with it. But 4 times as much they're charging today? And incidentally, go up to Canada, not a lot different than the United States. Debit cards and credit cards there issued by banks. You know what the interchange fee is charged in Canada today? 0. No charge. No charge at all to the merchant who takes a debit card in Canada. The same companies, Visa and MasterCard, charge 0 in Canada and 40 cents in the United States. Aren't we blessed to have 2 great credit card companies who've dreamed up how to stick it to American consumers at the benefit of American banks, on Wall Street particularly? That's what this is about. Now, most of my colleagues have gone home over the last week or two, and they've heard about this issue because it means a lot to a lot of people. What we did was exempt in this law credit unions and community banks. Some people say, why'd you exempt them? Why shouldn't they have reduced fees too? Well, we want to make sure that financially they are not disadvantaged by this. And we put in a specific exemption and said to the Federal Reserve, write up your rule to protect them. I have said on the floor, and I'll say it again, if at the end of the day, the rule from the Federal Reserve does not provide adequate protection for credit unions and community banks, I am ready to sign up today to put in even more protection in the law. I'll be there. I want to make sure they understand. They were exempted because I believe they should be, and I want to make sure that exemption works. But I don't care what happens to the Wall Street banks. I don't care what happens to these credit card companies. They seem to end up on their feet when it's all over anyway. After giving them billions of dollars of taxpayers' money to bail them out of their mess that they made of things in this recession, what'd they do? They sent us a big wet kiss in the form of multi-million-dollar bonuses for all their officers, smiling all the way to the bank with taxpayers' money. We don't owe them a thing. And the members who will come to the floor this week and vote with those big banks and those credit card companies really have to ask themselves, when are you ever going to stand up for consumers and retailers and merchants and small businesses across America? Is somebody going to speak up for them in this chamber? That's what this debate is about. And I hope at the end of the day that my colleagues will stand tall and say no to Wall Street, no to the credit card companies, that they'll stand by the retailers and the merchants to give them a chance for transparency and competition, to give them a chance for a reasonable fee for what is actually transpiring in this transaction.